Imagine waking up to the sound of chainsaws tearing through the sanctuary you spent 30 years paying off, only to be told by a woman with a clipboard that your backyard is now community property. They didn't just cross a line, they tried to erase it. Most people would scream, but I just went back in mud and poured another cup of coffee. I knew something they didn't. Land deeds don't care about your feelings, and I was about to teach them a masterclass in property law. If you appreciate a methodical, stone-cold legal dismantling of an entitlement complex, you're in the right place. The coffee in Arthur Penhaligon's mug was black, scalding, and exactly the way he liked it. At 6 a.m., the world was usually gray and silent, save for the rustle of the North Carolina pines that buffered his farmhouse from the creeping suburban sprawl of Oak Ridge Meadows. Arthur stood on his back porch, breathing in the cold mist. He was a man of geometry and precision, a retired surveyor who saw the world in angles, elevations, and absolute coordinates. His 10 acres were his kingdom, a jagged puzzle piece of history that the developers had failed to swallow up in the late 90s. He squinted. A flash of unnatural color cut through the sepia tones of the winter woods. Roughly 200 feet past the old stone wall, which Arthur knew for a fact was 50 feet inside his property line, a strip of neon orange flagging tape fluttered from the branch of a white oak. Arthur set his mug down on the railing. The ceramic made a sharp clack in the quiet morning. He walked down the porch steps, his boots crunching on the frost-hardened grass. He didn't run. Arthur never ran. He moved with the steady, measuring gait of a man who had walked thousands of miles of property lines in his career. As he approached the woods, he saw another ribbon, then another. They formed a jagged line cutting a wide swath through his timber, effectively slicing off a 3-acre chunk of his land. He reached the white oak and examined the tape. It was stamped with black lettering. Proposed clearing line. Proposed by whom, Arthur muttered, his voice gravelly from disuse. He pulled a pocket knife from his jeans, sliced the tape, and pocketed it. He continued deeper into the woods, following the breadcrumbs of orange plastic. They led all the way to the property boundary, where the manicured fescue of the Oak Ridge Meadows common area met his wild undergrowth. Standing there was a young man in a reflective vest, setting up a tripod. A surveyor, or rather a kid holding a stick who thought he was a surveyor. Arthur stepped out from the brush. The kid jumped, nearly knocking over his instrument. "Morning, Sir," Arthur said, his tone flat. "Jesus, man, you scared me," the kid said, adjusting his hard hat. "You live in the subdivision?" "No," Arthur said, "I live right there." He pointed a thumb back toward his farmhouse, hidden through the trees. "What are you staking?" "HOA improvement. Project," the kid replied, checking his clipboard. "We're marking out the new nature trail and yoga pavilion. Ms. Miller wants the clearing to start Monday." Arthur felt a muscle in his jaw tighten. "Ms. Miller is the HOA president, I assume." "Yeah, she's a piece of work, but she signs the checks." The kid gestured vaguely into Arthur's woods. "Everything from the drainage ditch to the creek is getting paved. Gonna be nice." "The creek," Arthur stated, "is 300 feet onto my property. The drainage ditch is the property line." The kid shook his head, pulling out a folded, laminated sheet. It looked like a marketing brochure, not a registered plat map. "Nah, look here, map says community green space extends to the water feature." Arthur looked at the glossy paper. It was a sales map from the developer, full of artistic renderings and legal disclaimers in microscopic font. It had zero legal standing. "That's a cartoon," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave. "It's not a survey." "Look, buddy, I just put the stakes where the boss tells me," the kid said, dismissing him. "If you got a problem with the beautification committee, take it up with Brenda Miller. I got work to do." Arthur looked at the tripod, then at the orange tape fluttering in the wind. He could have kicked the tripod over. He could have screamed about trespassing. He could have called the sheriff right then, but Arthur knew something about property disputes. If you fight too early, they claim it's a misunderstanding. If you wait until they pour concrete, it becomes a permanent alteration of assets. "Brenda Miller," Arthur repeated, memorizing the name. "Monday, you said?" "Bulldozers at 8 o'clock a.m., the kid confirmed, turning his back to look through the lens. Arthur turned around and walked back toward his house. He didn't remove any more tape. He needed them there. He needed them to think they were right. He walked into his study, a room lined with flat file cabinets and rolled schematics. He pulled open the drawer labeled Deeds and Plats, 1980 to 2000. He found the original county-stamped survey from when he bought the land. He laid it out on his drafting table, weighing the corners down with brass compasses. The line was clear. The creek was his. The trees were his. He reached for the phone, but then paused. He looked out the window at the orange flags dancing in the distance. A cold, predatory smile touched his lips. "Let them clear it," he whispered to the empty room. "Let them build it. Then I'll take it." He sat down, opened a fresh notebook, and wrote the date. Then he wrote, Entry 1, evidence of encroachment. The war had started, and the enemy didn't even know they were on the battlefield. The Oak Bridge Meadows Community Center smelled of floor wax and stale popcorn. It was a sterile, beige box filled with folding chairs and home owners who looked like they would rather be anywhere else. Arthur Penhaligon sat in the back row. He wore a pressed flannel shirt and held a cardboard tube containing the 1998 certified survey of his property. He didn't blend in. The room was a sea of athleisure wear and smartwatches. Arthur looked like a relic from a time when men built their own fences. At the front of the room, behind a plastic table draped in a tablecloth emblazoned with the HOA logo, sat the board. In the center was Brenda Miller. She was a woman who wielded her gavel like a weapon. Her hair was sprayed into an immovable helmet of blonde, and her smile was practiced, not felt. And finally, Brenda announced into the microphone, her voice shrill with excitement, "I am thrilled to unveil the renderings for Project Serenity, the new yoga pavilion and nature walk." A projector screen descended. The lights dimmed. A slide appeared showing a computer-generated paradise, a wooden gazebo surrounded by cherry blossoms, right where Arthur's 100-year-old white oaks currently stood. Applause rippled through the room. "Construction begins Monday," Brenda beamed. "This will raise our property values by an estimated 4%. We are reclaiming the neglected woodlands on the north border for the good of the community." Arthur stood up. He didn't wait for the Q&A session. He simply stood, a dark silhouette against the glowing projection of his stolen land. "Madam President," Arthur said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. It had the weight of authority. The room went silent. Brenda squinted against the projector light. "Excuse me? The floor is not open for comments yet, and I don't believe I recognize you. Are you a resident?" "I am your neighbor," Arthur said, stepping into the aisle. "My name is Arthur Penhaligon. I own the 10 acres bordering the north side, the land you just called neglected woodlands." Brenda's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. "Ah, Mr. Penhaligon, we sent you a notification about the noise ordinance compliance for the construction. Did you not receive it?" "I received a notice that you intend to trespass," Arthur said, walking toward the front. He uncapped the cardboard tube and slid out the large blue-line document. He spread it onto the empty table next to the projector. "This is a registered boundary survey, stamped by the county. It shows clearly that your Project Serenity is 150 feet inside my property line." The board members exchanged nervous glances, but Brenda didn't look at the map. She looked at the audience, rolling her eyes theatrically. "Mr. Penhaligon," she said, her tone dripping with condescension, like a kindergarten teacher addressing a slow child, "we have conducted our own due diligence. The developer's layout clearly marks that area as a common area easement." "A developer's layout is marketing material," Arthur said, tapping the seal on his document. "This is a legal instrument. If you cross this line, you are violating state property laws." Brenda laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. "Oh, please. You're showing us a hand-drawn doodle from 20 years ago. We live in the digital age, sir. Our contractors use GPS. GPS is only as good as the coordinates entered into it," Arthur countered, his patience thinning. "Your coordinates are wrong." "I think we've heard enough," Brenda interrupted. She banged the gavel. "You are disrupting a private meeting. We are trying to improve this community, and we won't be held hostage by a confused senior citizen who doesn't understand modern zoning. Please leave." "I am giving you formal notice," Arthur said, leaving the map on the table. "Do not cut those trees." Security! Brenda barked into the microphone. A heavy-set man in a uniform that was 2 sizes too tight waddled over from the door. He put a hand on Arthur's shoulder. "Let's go, Pop," the guard grunted. Arthur looked at the guard's hand, then at Brenda. The room was murmuring now, not in support of him, but against him. They saw a cranky old man trying to stop their new park. They saw an obstacle to their property value. Arthur carefully rolled up his map. He didn't resist. He didn't make a scene. He had done exactly what the law required. He had notified them of the error. He had given them a chance to retreat. "You're making a mistake," Arthur said quietly to Brenda. "The only mistake," Brenda hissed, leaning over the table so only he could hear, "is you thinking you can bully this board. We have a legal fund. You have a pickup truck. Get out." Arthur turned and walked out of the double doors. The cool night air hit his face. He walked to his truck, unlocked the door, and sat in the dark cab for a moment. He had offered them the easy way out. They had chosen the hard way. He started the engine. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he didn't look back at the community center. He was already thinking about the drone batteries charging in his workshop. If they wanted to play the digital age game, he would show them just how high definition his evidence could get. Monday morning arrived with the scent of diesel fumes overpowering the smell of pine needles. At 7:45 a.m., the first low rumble vibrated through the floorboards of Arthur's farmhouse. By 8:20 a.m., the noise had escalated to a mechanical roar. Arthur did not go outside. He did not stand on his porch with a shotgun, nor did he scream at the workers. Instead, he stood in the bay window of his second-floor study, hidden behind the curtains. On a tripod next to him, a high-resolution Sony camcorder was recording. The red RESC light blinked steadily. The timestamp in the corner of the viewfinder counted every second of the violation. Through the lens, he watched the invasion force assemble. 2 yellow excavators and a bulldozer emblazoned with M&T, contracting, sat idling on the edge of the grass. Standing near them was Brenda Miller. She was wearing a pink hard hat that looked pristine, pointing imperiously into the dense thicket of Arthur's woods. She gave a point. Signal. A sharp chopping motion with her hand. The lead bulldozer surged forward. Its steel blade caught the trunk of a sapling, snapping it like a toothpick. It kept going, grinding the young tree into the mud as it pushed deeper toward the darker, older growth. Arthur flinched. His hand tightened around his coffee mug until his knuckles turned white. These weren't just assets. They were living things. He had watched that grove mature for 30 years. He picked up his cell phone and dialed a number saved simply as Robert, legal. It rang twice. Arthur. Robert's voice was calm, a stark contrast to the violence unfolding outside the window. "Are they there?" "They just crossed the line," Arthur said, his voice tight. "They're taking down the undergrowth now. They're heading for the black walnuts." "Do not intervene," Robert instructed sharply. "Arthur, this is crucial. If you go out there now, they'll stop. They'll claim it was an honest mistake, pay a small fine for a few bushes, and tie this up in mediation for years. You need to let them commit." "They are about to tear down a 60-year-old oak, Robert," Arthur said, watching the excavator raise its hydraulic arm. The metal claw reached up, grabbing the trunk of a massive tree that Arthur had climbed as a younger man. "I know it hurts," Robert said, "but in the state of North Carolina, willful destruction of timber without a license carries treble damages, 3 times the value. Plus, we are going for restoration to original condition. That means they don't just pay for the lumber. They have to pay to truck in and plant mature trees to replace what they took. That is a 6-figure mistake, Arthur. Let them make it." Arthur watched as the excavator pulled. The tree groaned, a sound like a gunshot, and then crashed to the forest floor, taking 2 smaller maples with it. The ground shook. "They just took the oak," Arthur whispered. "Good," Robert said cold-heartedly. "That's another $5,000 plus restoration costs. Keep filming. Do not let them see you. We need them to think you've given up." Arthur hung up the phone. He felt sick, but a cold resolve was hardening in his gut. He walked over to his workbench and picked up his drone. It was a professional-grade quadcopter used for surveying, equipped with RTK positioning for centimeter-level accuracy. He opened the window on the far side of the house, away from the construction, and launched the drone. He flew it high, well above the tree line, hovering silently at 400 feet. On his tablet screen, he watched the aerial view. The raw earth scar was widening, bleeding into the green rectangle of his property deed. He toggled the overlay on his controller, superimposing the official GIS property lines over the live video feed. The machinery was deep inside the red boundary line. It wasn't even close. He snapped high-resolution photos, capturing the license plates of the trucks, the faces of the operators, and Brenda Miller posing for a selfie in front of the fallen oak. She was smiling, giving a thumbs up to her phone camera, likely posting about the progress on the neighborhood Facebook page. Arthur recorded it all. The destruction continued for hours. By noon, a swath of forest the size of a football field was gone, replaced by churned mud and broken roots. When the crews broke for lunch, silence returned to the farm, but it was a heavy, mournful silence. The wind didn't rustle the leaves anymore. It just blew across the open wound in the earth. Arthur went downstairs to the kitchen. He made a sandwich, but didn't eat it. He sat at the table, listening to the men laughing outside, cracking jokes about how easy the clearing was. "No rock, just soft dirt," one of them shouted. "We'll have the foundation poured by Friday." Arthur looked at the calendar on his wall. Friday, that meant 4 more days of destruction. 4 more days of letting them think they had won. He walked back to the study and swapped the memory card and the camera. He labeled the used card Evidence Day 01 and locked it in his fireproof safe. "Pour the foundation," Arthur said to the empty room. "Pour every ounce of concrete you have." He wasn't protecting his land anymore. He was building a trap. Winter thawed into a wet, muddy spring, and with the changing season came the cement trucks. The silence Arthur had maintained was absolute. He had stopped attending meetings. He had stopped returning Brenda's emails, which had shifted from threatening to patronizingly cheerful. To the residents of Oak Bridge Meadows, the old man in the farmhouse had simply rolled over and died, metaphorically speaking. They were wrong. Arthur wasn't hiding. He was accounting. From his vantage point behind the dusty blinds of his study, Arthur treated the construction site not as a nuisance, but as a crime scene that was actively being contaminated. Every morning he sat at his drafting table with a ledger and a pair of binoculars. He logged the arrival of the subcontractors. March 12th, A&B Concrete, pouring slab foundation. Prox's 40 yards of concrete. He did the math in the margins. 40 yards of concrete, plus labor, plus the rebar reinforcement he had filmed them installing the day before. That was easily $15,000 sinking into the soil of his property. Soil that they would eventually have to pay to dig back up. The structure itself began to rise. A timber-framed pavilion with the cedar shingles and elaborate stonework columns. It was, objectively, a beautiful structure. Brenda had spared no expense. She had raided the HOA's reserve fund to create her legacy. One afternoon, a letter arrived in Arthur's mailbox. It wasn't a fine this time. It was a card, printed on thick, cream-colored stock with the HOA crest embossed in gold foil. "Dear Arthur, we appreciate your tacit cooperation in the community improvement project. We know change can be difficult for our older neighbors, but we trust that once the landscaping grows in, you will enjoy the view of the Serenity Pavilion as much as we do. Perhaps you'll even join us for morning yoga." Warmly, Brenda Miller Arthur read the card standing by his kitchen counter. A dry chuckle rattled in his chest. "Tacit cooperation," he repeated. He walked over to his filing cabinet and dropped the card into the folder marked Exhibit D, Admission of Intent. By May, the heavy machinery was gone, replaced by electricians and landscapers. They trenched lines for pathway lighting, digging jagged scars through the root systems of the remaining trees to install high-voltage wiring. They planted non-native ornamental grasses that Arthur knew would die in the local clay without heavy chemical treatment. He documented the trenching depth. It was 12 inches shallower than code required. He noted the wiring type, not rated for direct burial. Not only were they trespassing, but they were also building a fire hazard. Arthur called Robert. "They're installing the lighting fixtures today," Arthur reported, looking at the feed from his perimeter security camera. "Copper lanterns. Looks expensive." Let them screw in the last bulb, Robert replied. We need the project to be substantially complete to trigger the maximum liability insurance payout. If we sue now, they can just halt construction and leave you with a half-built mess. We want a finished product so the judge can order a total demolition. They've scheduled a grand opening for next Saturday, Arthur said. Balloons, catering, the works. Perfect, Robert said. That gives us a hard date. I'll have the papers ready to serve. How does your survey look? Ironclad, Arthur said. I went out last night at 2:00 a.m. with the total station. I shot the corners of their pavilion. The structure encroaches 42 feet past the line. The walking path goes 100 feet deep. They are occupying a total of 3.2 acres. 3.2 acres, Robert whistled. Arthur, in this county, that's grand larceny territory if it wasn't civil. You're going to own that HOA by the time we're done. Arthur hung up and looked out the window. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the newly sodded lawn that used to be his forest. The lights of the pavilion flickered on, soft, warm, inviting. It looked peaceful. It looked permanent. Brenda Miller was down there, walking the path with a glass of wine in her hand, admiring her work. She paused to adjust a flower pot, acting like the lady of the manor. Arthur watched her without anger. The anger had burned away weeks ago, leaving only cold calculation. She looked at his house, likely thinking she had tamed the grumpy neighbor. He turned off the lights in his study, leaving him in darkness. Enjoy it, Brenda, he whispered. It's the most expensive glass of wine you'll ever drink. The trap was primed. All that was left was to spring it. The sky was a perfect, insultingly bright blue. It was the kind of Saturday that real estate agents prayed for, and Brenda Miller had certainly capitalized on the weather. By 9:00 a.m., the nature walk behind Arthur's farmhouse was transformed into a carnival. A massive arch of green and gold balloons framed the entrance to the new path. A catering van was parked on the grass. Arthur noted the tires sinking 3 inches into the soft topsoil he had spent years aerating, grilling sliders and hot dogs. Arthur sat on his back porch in a wicker chair, a glass of iced tea sweating in his hand. He was dressed in his Sunday best, a crisp button-down shirt and slacks. To the casual observer, he looked like a genial old man enjoying the festivities from a distance. In reality, he was a warden watching a prison riot. From the woods, the sound of a portable sound system crackled to life. Walking on sunshine blasted through the trees or bees, vibrating the windows of Arthur's house. He didn't call the police with a noise complaint. He wanted them comfortable. He wanted them loud. Crowds began to filter in, young families with strollers, retirees walking dogs, and board members wearing matching polo shirts. They walked past the private property signs Arthur had posted months ago, signs that had been conveniently obscured by potted ferns placed by the event planners. At 11:00 a.m., the music faded, and a microphone screeched. Brenda Miller stepped up to a podium erected in the center of the yoga pavilion. She looked triumphant, holding a giant pair of ceremonial scissors. Arthur picked up his binoculars. He could see the flush of excitement on her cheeks. Welcome, neighbors, Brenda's voice echoed through the woods. Welcome to the Oak Bridge Serenity Park. 6 months ago, this was nothing but tangled briars and muddy ditches. But we had a vision. We saw potential where others saw only obstacles. The crowd applauded. Arthur took a sip of tea. Obstacles, he thought. That's me. There were those who said we couldn't do this. Brenda continued, gesturing vaguely toward Arthur's house. There were those who tried to hide behind outdated paperwork and negativity. But this board stood firm. We reclaimed this land for you, the families, the heart of this community. She paused for effect, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. This park belongs to no one person. It belongs to us all. It is our sanctuary. Arthur set the binoculars down. It belongs to the bank, he corrected softly. And you just admitted to willful trespassing in front of 50 witnesses. Brenda sliced the red ribbon. The crowd cheered. Children ran onto the fresh sod. A dog relieved itself on one of the expensive Japanese maples. People began mingling, eating the free food, and complimenting the board members on the stunning improvement. Arthur went inside and walked to his desk. Sitting in the center of the blotter was a thick manila envelope. It wasn't the lawsuit itself that was already at the courthouse. This was a copy of the filing stamped with the official seal of the clerk of Superior Court, dated late Friday afternoon. He picked up his phone. "Robert," Arthur said. "They having fun?" the lawyer asked. "They're cutting the cake," Arthur replied. "Brenda just gave a speech claiming they reclaimed the land." "Fantastic," Robert said. "We'll subpoena the video footage of that speech. It proves premeditation. It destroys any defense of accidental encroachment. They didn't just stumble onto your land, they claimed it as a conquest." "The process server?" "He's scheduled for tomorrow morning," Robert confirmed. "Sunday service. It's legal in this state, and it catches people with their guard down. He knows Brenda's jogging route." Arthur looked out the window one last time. The party was winding down. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows across the pavilion. The guests were leaving, taking their balloons and leftover cake, leaving behind trash and trampled grass. Brenda remained, standing alone in the pavilion, running her hand along the stone railing. She looked at Arthur's house, and for a moment their eyes met across the distance. She gave a small, smug wave, a final victory lap. Arthur didn't wave back. He simply nodded, a slow, grave acknowledgement. She took it as submission. She didn't realize it was a sentencing. He turned away from the window and went to the kitchen to start dinner. The noise was gone. The silence returned. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with the impending weight of the gavel. The party was over. The eviction was about to begin. Sunday mornings in Oak Bridge Meadows were aggressively peaceful. It was a time for manicured lawns, high-end espresso machines, and ignoring the world outside the subdivision gates. Brenda Miller was jogging along the newly paved path of the Serenity Park, her expensive running shoes slapping rhythmically against the asphalt. She felt light. The grand opening had been a smash hit. The Facebook photos had over 200 likes, and the board members were already talking about her re-election. She paused at the stone bridge, the one built over the creek that Arthur claimed was his, and stretched her calves, admiring the view. She saw a man standing near the entrance of the path. He didn't look like a resident. He wore a plain gray windbreaker, nondescript jeans, and held a thick stack of papers rubber-banded together. He wasn't admiring the landscaping. He was checking a photo on his phone, then looking at her. Brenda frowned. She assumed he was a solicitor or perhaps a contractor looking for a check. She jogged toward him, intending to tell him that business was conducted on weekdays only. "Excuse me," she said, slowing to a walk as she approached. "This is a private park for residents only." The man didn't back down. He stepped onto the pavement, blocking her path. His face was blank, professional, and entirely uninterested in her authority. "Are you Brenda Miller?" he asked. "I am the HOA president, yes," she replied, puffing out her chest slightly. "Can I help you?" "Brenda Ellen Miller, residing at 404 Oakview Drive." "Yes, what is this about?" She was getting annoyed now. The man thrust the heavy stack of papers into her chest. Instinctively, her hands came up to grab them. "You have been served," the man said. He turned around immediately, pulled out his phone, snapped a picture of her holding the documents, proof of service, and began walking back to his car parked on the street. "Excuse me, you can't just... What is this?" Brenda shouted after him. "Civil action," the man called back without stopping. "Have a nice day, ma'am." Brenda looked down at the bundle in her hands. It was heavy, at least 100 pages. The cover sheet was blue, stamped with the seal of the State Superior Court. Plaintiff, Arthur Penhaligon, defendant, Oak Bridge Meadows Homeowners Association, Brenda Miller individually, etal nature of action. 1. Trespass to real property. 2. Conversion of timber. Quiet title. 4. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Brenda's hands started to shake. She flipped the page to the summary of relief requested. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon, her breath catching in her throat as the numbers jumped out at her. Plaintiff seeks immediate injunctive relief ordering the total removal of all encroachments. Plaintiff seeks statutory treble damages for the willful destruction of 142 hardwood trees. Estimated timber value, $85,000. Treble damages, $255,000. Plaintiff seeks restoration costs to return the topography to its original state. Estimated engineering and replanting costs, $450,000. Brenda felt the blood drain from her face. She leaned against one of the newly planted cherry trees for support. They weren't asking for a settlement. They weren't asking for the HOA to buy the land. They were asking for the park to be destroyed. She looked at the total demand at the bottom of the page. It was nearly $1 million. The HOA's reserve fund had barely $60,000 left after the construction. "He can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We have a map. We have a map." She looked up toward the farmhouse on the hill. The blinds in the second-story window were drawn tight, but she felt eyes on her. The house loomed over the park like a judge's bench. For the first time since this project began, Brenda Miller didn't feel like the conqueror. She felt like a trespasser. She realized with a sick, sinking feeling that the man in the farmhouse hadn't been ignoring them. He had been waiting for them to finish, just so he could make them pay to tear it all down. She frantically patted her pockets for her phone. She needed to call the HOA attorney. She needed to tell the board. But as she dialed, staring at the glossy pavilion she had bankrupted the community to build, she knew it was already too late. The trap had snapped shut. The conference room at the downtown law firm of Sterling and Associates was cold, silent, and smelled faintly of expensive leather and fear. This was the discovery deposition of Brenda Miller. Arthur sat at the far end of the mahogany table, hands folded on his lap. He looked like a statue. Beside him, his attorney, Robert, arranged a stack of documents with the precision of a blackjack dealer. Across from them sat Brenda and the HOA's lawyer, a tired-looking man named Mr. Sterling, who had clearly realized too late what kind of mess his client had dragged him into. Brenda looked diminished. Without her gavel and her microphone, stripped of the performative authority of the board meetings, she was just a woman in a polyester blouse trying to explain why she had destroyed a man's property. "Ms. Miller," Robert began, his voice pleasant but dangerous, "you stated in your affidavit that the HOA believed in good faith that the land in question was common property. Is that correct?" "Yes," Brenda said, her voice tight. "The developer's map, the brochure, it showed the green space extending to the creek." "Exhibit A," Robert said, sliding a glossy piece of paper across the table. "The marketing brochure. At the bottom, in size 6 font, do you see the text I have highlighted?" Brenda squinted. "It says, 'Artist rendering only, not for legal survey purposes.'" "Correct," Robert said. "Now let's look at Exhibit B." He slid a thick binder across the table. "These are the minutes from the HOA board meeting dated November 12th, last year, 3 months before you broke ground." Mr. Sterling leaned in, frowning. He flipped through the binder. He hadn't seen this yet. "On page 4, Robert continued, there was a motion proposed by the treasurer to hire a licensed surveyor to mark the boundaries before starting Project Serenity. The estimated cost was $2,000. Arthur watched Brenda's face. She went pale. "Ms. Miller," Robert said, leaning forward, "can you read the line item regarding the vote?" Brenda remained silent. "I can read it for the record," Robert offered. It says, "President Miller vetoed the motion, cited unnecessary expense, stated she could find the line herself using the county GIS app on her iPhone." Mr. Sterling closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. He let out a long, slow sigh. In the legal world, that sigh was the sound of a case dying. "Ms. Miller," Robert pressed, "are you aware that consumer-grade GPS apps have a margin of error of up to 30 feet? And are you aware that relying on a phone app over a licensed survey constitutes gross negligence under state property statutes?" We were trying to save the community money," Brenda stammered. "We didn't think Mr. Penhaligon really owned that woods. He never uses it." Arthur finally spoke. His voice was gravel over concrete. "Use it or not, Ms. Miller, I pay taxes on it. Every inch." Robert raised a hand to silence Arthur, then dropped the final hammer. "We have the 1945 deed," Robert said, tapping the yellow document. "We have the 1998 certified plat. We have the drone footage of your construction crews crossing the iron pins that Mr. Penhaligon's grandfather set in the ground. And we have your speech, recorded at the opening, where you admitted to reclaiming land you knew was contested." Mr. Sterling looked at the pile of evidence. He looked at his client, who was now trembling. He looked at Arthur's unyielding expression. "Counsel," Mr. Sterling said to Robert, his tone shifting from adversarial to defeated. "Can we take a 5-minute recess? I need to speak with my client." "Take 10, Robert replied coolly. As the lawyer shuffled papers, Arthur stood up to stretch his legs. He walked to the window looking out over the city skyline. He could hear Brenda whispering frantically behind him. "You said this would go away. You said he was just a cranky old man." "He is a cranky old man with a AAA survey and a savage attorney, Brenda," Mr. Sterling hissed back, his voice low but audible. "You trespassed. You destroyed timber. You acted against the board's advice. The HOA insurance might not even cover this because it was an intentional act. Do you understand? They might come after you personally." Arthur stared at his reflection in the glass. He didn't smile. This wasn't funny. It was a tragedy of arrogance. Brenda had tried to save $2,000 on a survey, and now she was about to cost her neighbors $1 million. The door opened, and the stenographer typed a timestamp. The recess was over. Mr. Sterling sat back down. He didn't look ready to fight. He looked like a man ready to surrender unconditionally. "We are prepared to discuss settlement," Sterling said quietly. "We aren't," Robert replied, closing his folder. "We are moving for summary judgment. We want the land back, we want the trees back, and we want the pavilion gone." Arthur looked at Brenda. She wasn't the president anymore. She was just a defendant. The letter hit every mailbox in the Oak Ridge Meadows on a Tuesday afternoon. It was not a cheerful invitation to a yoga class. It was a formal notification of a special assessment levied by the Homeowners Association Board. To satisfy the court judgment in the case of Penhaligon versus Oak Ridge Meadows HOA, every homeowner was required to pay an immediate one-time fee of $8,400. The neighborhood exploded. The community Facebook page, once a place for sharing cookie recipes and complaints about trash cans, turned into a digital riot. The neighbors weren't angry at Arthur anymore. They had read the court transcripts. They knew exactly who had vetoed the survey. They knew who had ignored the cease and desist orders. They were coming for Brenda. Arthur watched the fallout from his front porch, but his attention was primarily focused on the backyard. At 8:00 a.m., the heavy machinery returned. In a twist of poetic justice that Arthur found particularly satisfying, the court order had mandated that the HOA use a certified remediation crew to undo the damage. The Serenity Pavilion, which had stood for less than 3 months, was currently being fed into a wood chipper. The sound was deafening, a violent grinding that chewed up the cedar beams and expensive shingles, spitting them out as mulch. Arthur sipped his coffee. He watched a jackhammer crew attack the stone foundation. Every crack of the concrete sounded like a cash register ringing in reverse. He wasn't alone on the porch today. Robert, his attorney, stood leaning against the railing. "The check cleared this morning," Robert said, watching the destruction. "Full damages plus legal fees. The remediation escrow is fully funded." "And the trees?" Arthur asked. "Scheduled for delivery tomorrow," Robert confirmed. 24 mature white oaks, 15-foot root balls, transported on flatbeds. "They're costing the HOA about $6,000 apiece." Arthur nodded. "Good. Put them right back where they were." Down near the construction site, a moving truck was backing into a driveway. It was Brenda Miller's driveway. She wasn't outside supervising the move. Since the emergency board meeting, where she was unanimously voted out, and threatened with a personal liability lawsuit by her neighbors, she hadn't been seen much. The for sale sign in her yard had appeared 3 days after the judgment. In a neighborhood now saddled with a massive lawsuit debt and high HOA fees, she would be lucky to break even. The demolition crew finished the pavilion and moved on to the paved walking path. The excavator claw ripped up the asphalt in great black chunks, exposing the red clay beneath. It was ugly work, tearing a scar into the land to heal it, but Arthur knew it was necessary. By late afternoon, the intruders were gone. The pavilion was gone. The path was gone. The land was raw and wounded, but it was empty. The neon orange property stakes were back, this time reinforced with steel posts that Arthur had installed himself. The sun began to set, casting a golden light over the broken earth. Arthur walked down the hill, his boots sinking slightly into the soil. He walked to the edge of the creek. His creak. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the piece of neon flagging tape he had cut from the tree in Chapter 1. The plastic was faded and crinkled. He looked at the empty space where the HOA had tried to stake their claim. They had wanted a view. They had wanted an amenity. They had forgotten that ownership isn't about what you want. It's about what you can prove. He dropped the piece of tape onto the ground and ground it into the mud with his heel. Arthur turned back toward his farmhouse. The silence of the evening was returning. Real silence this time, not the manufactured quiet of a park. The pines whispered in the wind. Tomorrow the new oaks would arrive. They would put down roots, deep and strong, and they would stand guard long after Brenda Miller and her clipboard were forgotten. Arthur Penhaligon had reclaimed every inch.